Are we going to start over? They don't need all to know all that.
No, they don't need to know all that. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Big Idea Podcast. My name is Eric Bramlett, and I am joined by...
Tammy Melchien.
How you doing today, Tammy?
Right now, I'm great.
Awesome. I love it. No further explanation required. We are communicating about a series that is taking place... What is this?
I think it's June.
June-ish?
Yeah,
the first week of June.
Yep, month of June.
And on. And it's going to be a good one. It's based on a really, really good book, from what I understand. Mm-hmm. And it's called God Behaving Badly. Mm-hmm. And this is a topic that I was just having a conversation in a men's group about recently. It's definitely one of those things that as people delve into the Bible, they want to know more about. And in some cases, it's a resistance factor for even getting involved and getting into what the Bible has to say, is because of things that they may have read or may have heard or may think they understand about the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament.
Who turns out to be the same God.
Turns out.
Same
God.
Yeah, but a lot of people struggle with God as they perceive him in the Old Testament.
Yeah. All right. Is that enough of an overall overview of where we're headed? What else would you say about this series?
Yeah, maybe just a couple things. And I have we are really probably going to be teaching the content of this book. The book's really good if you're ever looking for something to read. And also, it had a lot of connecting tissue and like pop culture, things mm-hmm. back to references that I think we might be able to find quite a few things to use in the service, even in that.
Awesome.
But I will say that one thing, and this is about 2/3 of the way down the page here, I think maybe we want to do this in this series as being intentional about how we refer to God during this series. What he sets up in the beginning of the book is, in the Old Testament, the most frequent way that God is referred to is with the name Yahweh. Like by far more than I think it's over 6,800 times. That's the way he's referred to. And it's significant that, like in our NIV Bibles, you might not realize that because it usually is in that little capitalized, the Lord mm-hmm. is whenever you see that in an NIV Bible, that's Yahweh. And why I thought, the reason he did it is he said, it's significant that God tells people to call him by a name and not by a title. Mm-hmm. And so, this biblical pattern of referring to God primarily as Yahweh in the Old Testament and Jesus in the New Testament tells us that God wants to be on a first name basis with his people. And it's this model of intimacy. So I think we may go ahead and use that, like, as we go through this series, just because people are not used to hearing us refer to God as Yahweh.
Yeah.
But it also, I think, maybe to as a reminder of the intimacy of God in mm-hmm. both Old and New Testaments. Mm. And so, I don't know, that's just maybe a note to take of why that's going to appear that way throughout the series.
Very good. I dig it.
I went ahead, again, because we're basing off in the map I just included, there were some in the opening chapter of this book. There were some things like, like a clip from Bruce Almighty, something from The Simpsons, something like mm-hmm. things that I thought mm-hmm. we might be able to use as in the hook parts of messages. So that's why those are in the map.
Very, very good. All right. So then each week kind of takes kind of this pro and con, mm-hmm. Old Testament, New Testament kind of mm-hmm. deal. And so week 1 is Yahweh, is God violent or peaceful? And kind of putting that out there. And
I think one of the things that's going to be so interesting about this series is we're going to, talk about stories and passages that we never teach on. Just if you look at this, like one of the stories is about Elisha and him calling the teens are egging him on, and he curses them, and then bears come out and maul them. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah. What is that about? So,
doesn't sound good.
Yeah. Well, we're dealing here with the why does God seem to be so angry and these ways lashed out? So you have that story. You also have a quick reference that we do where, there's a dramatic example of an angel of Yahweh slaughtering 185,000 Assyrians. And you kind of go, wait, what the, Mm-hmm. And so, part of that is we're going to walk through these is for us to consider, okay, sometimes like when we're reading these with a 2019 lens in an English translation, like maybe sometimes we're not fully understanding everything that is happening here. So there's some cultural things, I think, when we approach these hard texts that we have to look at. But then we also have to, is the story of Elijah and these youth, is the story that Yahweh picks on kids, or is the story that Yahweh protects the life of Elijah? Because and one of the things that's in here is even that the Hebrew word for boys there, we get in our mind, there's these like 12-year-olds picking on him, but that's the same word that can be used for, it's used for Benjamin when he's in his 20s.
Oh, gotcha.
And so, again, we don't know the situation. It very may well have been that Elijah's life was at stake.
Right.
In this moment. And there's things like that we just always can't answer, Or in the case of the Assyrians, and you back up and you look at in the context, there's, Assyria was a brutally violent nation, and they had slaughtered a bunch of the Israelites. And, again, it's not that, and I think in this series, we're not necessarily going to be, we're not going to be able to walk away going, oh, that's why God smote.
Well, yeah, then I'm good. Yeah. Right.
But it's challenging us a little bit to look at, okay, what are the reasons that God got angry? And what are the reasons, that, because even Jesus gets angry. What are the reasons they get angry? And what the bottom line really in that is it seems that like there were two things. I think I have it in here. I'm trying to find it. There's another story here about Elisha too, where you could have thought God could have gotten angry, and he promotes peace. And so I think, again, looking at the overarch of this, God prefers peace to violence, but he uses violence to punish the wicked or to protect the weak. And that, kind of that is part of the reality of it. So I don't know if I'm explaining this that well, but
no, I think that's the challenge, and I think that, again, part of the dilemma that you have, even as you're starting to try to describe these things, is we feel a posture of defending one versus the other, and I think the reality is that because of context and because of just kind of understanding the larger narrative, it's not a question of either or, but in many cases it's both are in
and they're harder like questions, because we want to, like, we read a story of God getting angry and doing something like that, and we immediately might go, God's bad, and that kind of stuff. But one of the things interesting they pose in the book too is asking that question: is violence always wrong?
Right. And
the example they gave is, I don't know if you remember the story, the movie Valkyrie, with Tom Cruise, where it was a true story of some men that attempted to assassinate Hitler. Right. Okay, so they attempted this violent act. Was that right or wrong?
Right.
And the fact that it failed, and then hundreds of thousands of people. Right. Still lost. And so again, we're not saying, so it was right but it's not as easy. Right. Like, it's not as black and white sometimes as we want it to be. And I don't know. I think it's just going to make us start. Hopefully, what people walk out of this going, okay, I struggle with these passages, but can I begin to maybe give God the benefit of the doubt that maybe I don't understand?
Yeah. Well, and everything. I think a lot of people struggle with the crucifixion too for similar reasons, because it's such a violent, and kind of one asks oneself, why did it have to be? Jesus asked, does this have to be this way? I think, you say in the last line here, because of Jesus' willingness to be a voluntary victim of violence, we were reconciled with God, which, in light of the entire context, can be looked at as peacemaking. And I think that's like the land of both and that I think that this story is trying to get us towards. All right, well, that was pretty simple. So now we move on to
easy,
week 2.
Lighthearted series.
Yeah, exactly. Week 2, sexist or empowering?
Empowering, and yes, I need to make sure Sherry knows we've changed that second word there. So sexist or empowering. So, again, we did a message, I think, is going to be somewhat similar to this. A number of years ago in the beginning series, we talked about God's dream for men and women, where I think the bulk of this we're going to be in the creation account again, and looking at women being created in God's image, and when you get in the second creation count in Genesis 2, about this word azer that's often translated helper, and how so many times people have read a hierarchy in that is not really there unless you think God is
right.
Because most often that word refers to God as the helper. And so again, so we're going to look at a little bit of God's in the original in creation. Women were created in the image of God, just like men were created in the image of God. And they were, there's one phrase in here, I think that it is, I can't remember where it was. The text, when the text says the helper is suitable for the man, the Hebrew word there for suitable, it literally means opposite like him. It's the idea of like a mirror image. And so there's this connotation there of difference but sameness. And there's nothing in any of that in these first 2 chapters of Genesis that suggests the inferiority of either gender. And so, again, kind of looking at that as that was the original intent in creation, and realize that image in Genesis would have been shockingly progressive in ancient Near East culture. So I don't know, kind of just like reframes of how the Bible starts. And so then you get to the fall, but even in the fall story, there's some things that are interesting that this book pointed out, that like if the woman was portrayed negatively and the man positively, we could argue that this chapter establishes some kind of precedent for biblical sexism. But in some ways, the man, Adam, in the story is portrayed even worse than the woman. Right. And, like he ate, she at least had some like calculating about the fruit. It seems like he just took it and ate it.
He's like, okay.
He was the one that heard the prohibition directly from Yahweh about it. She had heard it through him. And he was with her when she took, and he did nothing, so I guess they just argue that like they're both equally at fault in that. And interesting too, both the man and the women receive curses, but the woman in the middle of that also receives a promise about, the kind of salvation coming through her, her seed, but that the man doesn't really, So again, there's nothing, it doesn't mean women are better than, there's just nothing to suggest hierarchy in any of these.
So then if it could be found, I'm jumping to the end a little bit, but if it can be found that God or Yahweh isn't sexist, then why do we think he is?
Because oftentimes we are.
Right.
And so, but even like when you think about that, it's critical to understand that the world as it is now is not the way God intended it to be. But it's like right away, even after the fall and after the curse, God begins trying to set things in motion to be right again. Like right away, he's going to that, and so we should join him in that, in making it right. So, because there are stories in the Bible that seem sexist, like the story. I mean, it's a horrible story, but like Lot, and he's got these 2 guys that come visit him. And an angry mob comes out, and they want Lot to give them these 2 guys so that they can have sex with them. And he says, "No, don't do these to these men. Take my virgin daughters." And, I mean, that is sexist. Yeah. But there's nothing in the Bible that like condones that or says that's good. In fact, everything about Lot is negative.
Right. Yeah.
In that.
Discerning the difference between things that we're supposed to emulate and things that are descriptive of what took place in that moment.
Yes.
Those are, potentially 2 different things.
Yeah. And so, we obviously live in a society where sexism is still an issue, and in the church is still an issue. And I think that's a lot of times why a lot of people, especially outside the church, would associate God with sexism. It's probably not because they're Bible scholars.
Right.
It's probably more because of how we have perpetuated the curse in the church. And so, so we're going to be challenging some of that, and again, how do we come alongside and join God in His plan of redemption of the world?
I'll dig it. I like
All
that.
right.
All right. So then we move on to week 3, and since it's Father's Day, we'll focus in on whether or not God was angry or loving. Was he an angry or loving father?
Which this is going to have
dads.
this is a little bit of the violence, peacemaking. There's some little hearts to that. But again, some interesting stories that we're going to tell. We're going to base this one around the story where the Ark of the Covenant had been captured by the Philistine army, and then was causing them all kinds of problems. So they want to give it back to Israel, and so Israel goes to get it back, and they put it on a cart, and it's rolling down the road, and it starts to tip over, and so a guy reaches out to steady it, and God strikes him dead. And it's like, what the?
Yeah.
And again, the challenge in this is to then kind of ask okay, well, why did God become so angry over that? And again, it seems so extreme to us, but what maybe do we not understand in the story? And so, as we exegete that passage here, there's some things that we're going to learn about, okay, so it's kind of like if you're, kid, if somebody walks into a store and they see your kid grab a candy bar and you yell at them, they might go, man, stop overreacting.
Right.
But what they might not know is that 35 times you sat your kid down and said, when we go in the store, you're not.
Right, exactly.
And so it and in some ways,
I'm going to give you one more chance.
Yeah.
Right.
And God had given some very specific instructions about how the ark was to be carried. And it, and so he also had a choice here. Do I just let disobedience go? Or do I, or do I need to kind of draw a line
action.
here?
Right.
But also this ark represents the presence of God. And so one of the things the book said, it's like by the way they were handling it was like they were asking God to ride in the trunk of the car. So it was like a disrespect thing. And even the fact that they had lost it kind of said something about how they valued the presence of God. And so really what you see in the story is Yahweh gets mad to protect his law, his honor, and his relationship with people. And then you think about, okay, what are the things that make me mad? And they're not nearly that
right, yeah.
that honorable.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, when there's no more cereal.
Yeah. But again, one of the things that we see here, though, is so you have these particular stories and you have to ask, okay, well, why did there must be some reason, because the vast majority of the Old Testament describes God as slow to anger.
Right.
Over and over again. And so, there's more going on than just pulling this one story out and just saying, oh, he's an angry God.
Right.
You have to understand it in context. Actually, there was one of the things from the beginning, I think I have here, that the author talked about how in his classrooms, he usually starts a discussion by saying, how does God reconcile the loving God of the Old Testament with the harsh God of the New Testament? He said inevitably his students think he got that mixed up.
Right.
But he says, well, no, wait a minute. Repeatedly in the Old Testament, God is consistently described as slow to anger and abounding in love, but Jesus speaks of hell more than anyone in Scripture.
Right. Yeah.
And so sometimes
storming through the temples, turning the tables in the temple. I mean, yeah, there's some evidence there of Jesus exerting that anger and doing so without sinning, which I think is another part of it.
So I think, to where we want to land this is looking at, some of us in the room need to get challenged about, Yahweh got angry over things that really had legitimate reasons to be angry for. And some of us need to be challenged about, we get angry over stuff that we shouldn't get angry about.
Right.
But some in the room, we also need to be challenged to get angry
about
over stuff.
Yeah,
the stuff that we should be, because God, and what it boils down to is God got angry over breakdown in relationship, and he got angry over injustice. And if we would get angry over those two things too, the world would be a better place if we got angry and did something about that. So.
Oh, that's good.
All right.
And that's, again, I mean, and you talk about it here at the end of this, but it's definitely one of those things, too, where these things aren't mutually
No,
exclusive.
love and anger
They're
are not.
set up as these,
Yeah.
you know, one or the other,
Yep.
and clearly they can coexist.
Yes. Yep.
All right, and week 4, then, we're wrapping it up by going for the jugular. Is Yahweh legalistic or gracious?
Okay. And again, so many people have the concept of God that he's just about all these rules, and you have to keep all these rules and this stuff, and almost like he like designed this whole system to stop our fun.
Right, to catch us, yeah.
But this message, for those of you that the people that end up giving, this is going to be a lot of fun, because you start, you know, I mean, one of the points about, okay, well, let's go back. Let's look at where the rules start. The very first rule in the Bible is to be fruitful and multiply. So basically, the first command that God gives is have a lot of sex. And then the second rule is eat from every tree but one. So his second command is eat a lot of food.
Right.
You know, and so, and again, these are pre-fall. And you're looking at God's first 2 commands are that we would delight in the gifts of sexuality and food. And that's how he, you know, and so that really tells us who God is. He is generous. He wants human beings to be happy. And that generosity, that goodness, that graciousness are the foundation for every other law, because he wants human beings to flourish. And so we really need to read kind of the rest of the commands in Scripture through that lens of God desiring our goodness and our you know, desiring for us to flourish. So I don't know. I think people are going to have some fun with that. At the beginning
That seems like a way
talk.
to go. Right after a relationship series too. It's a huge win.
Yeah.
Very good.
So then the other thing I'll mention is that they did a great job in the book with this section of, like, some people think God's legalistic when they read the Old Testament because it contains so many laws, and a lot of those laws seem random. But a couple things to consider. One, we have so many laws, and that's part of what makes a society work. And interesting enough, you know, you think back in the context of these ancient cultures, what it usually was is there was like one dude who had all the power and could rule with an iron fist. And when God gives these laws to the nation of Israel, they're actually like revolutionary, because it's like the first attempt at an egalitarian society.
Right, yeah, kingless.
Yeah.
Basically,
Yeah. Or with him as
with
the king.
him as king.
Yeah. And so, again, just because there's so many laws doesn't mean he's legalistic. And yes, some of the laws seem random, but it's because we don't understand the cultural context. And the example he gave in the book, he's like, okay, let's say it's the year 3,300, and we say that, like, you find something from back in our day that said, men, you should not go buy the February edition of Sports Illustrated.
Okay, I'm with you.
You know, and so somebody reading that 1,000 years from now, because chances are the swimsuit issue of Sports Illustrated will not.
Oh, is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
I knew you would know.
No, it's weird.
But, you know, like, chances are that will not exist 1,000 years from now. And so they'd be reading that and going, they made up the dumbest laws.
Right.
You know,
yeah,
because you don't understand the context. And so when we read, don't wear clothes woven with wool and linen, we're like, the Bible's ridiculous.
Right.
But we have we won't know. Because whatever the reason is behind that is lost to us in the cultural context. So
that's interesting.
But once again, why do people then think that God is legalistic? Well, and the answer probably is because Christians can be.
Right.
And we, you know, we can tend to drive this legalistic like stake into the ground in a number of different ways. And so we'll probably be addressing that at the end of this talk.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think if you look at the pattern of the series, you've got 1 and 3 and 2 and 4, and it's almost like 1 and 3 are hitting this, you know, these are not the right things. These are not polar opposites. They can live in the same space. And then you've also got the God's intent versus human screw up of the same intent.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know. That's
good pattern.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Well, I mean, I think it's a huge opportunity to help, you know, do a little myth busting, and then really, you know, challenge us to think about Yahweh relationally, think about, the Old Testament as a pursuit of relationship, pursuit of justice. And it turns out that God wasn't actually behaving badly after all.
He wasn't. Who knew?
So, well, thank you very much for joining us. This is going to be a great series, God Behaving Badly. I'm Eric. That's Tammy. This has been
See
the
everyone.
Big Idea Podcast. So long, everybody.